mentioned that a lot of companies you work with are good at testing hooks and doing multivariate creative testing, and they understand the need for that. I think that's pretty prevalent, at least online, and a lot of people talk about that. But I just love to hear from your experience how you have found success working with brands on a creative level. And let me just tell you where I'm coming from. A lot of times I'll see a creative team, or our own team in house. We do obviously the acquisition strategy and then all of the post production for creative. And so there may be like 7 people or 10 people involved in that flywheel and that entire process, from strategy to then getting creative on platform and analyzing the data of that strategy, or of that creative. And so there's a lot of information loss that can occur when you're going through those checkpoints. And there's a lot of like room for random acts of marketing or random acts of creative without like a clear path to scaling the actual creative or scaling the ad accounts. So I'm just curious how you work with brands on this level. How do you train teams on this, or how have you seen success or failure when it comes to generating new creative that actually helps scale ad accounts?
When I work with brands on this, I do it in a creative strategist capacity and sometimes do media buying as well. But like, I'm not shooting UGC or photoshopping stuff. So the first thing that
Yeah.
I reach out to them about is like, what are your internal resources? Do you have access to a graphic designer, a video editor? What kind of assets do you have in your library? How do you shoot new creative? And I won't really work with them on an ongoing basis unless they have good, the capabilities they need in house. Sometimes I'll do like a kind of like a creative strategy deep dive, customer persona work, testing plan, like basically sketch out what should you be speaking to, what and how would I test it, and then give that to them and say like, okay, here are some partners you could work with to like actually execute it. But if I had to make a list of things that brands need to be successful, first it's just having the capabilities to produce at least 5 to 20 pieces of creative a month. And that doesn't mean a studio video. It could literally mean iPhone pictures. Like,
Yeah.
taking, if you have 3 products, giving them to 3 of your employees and telling them like, okay, go home and like shoot this on your bathroom, like in your medicine cabinet or whatever.
Yeah.
So building that out, and then having people on your team who understand the organic sensibility. So like, there's a difference between a catalog shoot and a TikTok. And you want to make sure you don't only have to do the TikTok style, but you want to make sure that base is covered. And there's definitely like an aesthetic language there. And some people really get it. Some people can be trained to get it. And some people are just simply disinterested in trying. So making sure that you have that base covered. I could talk about process too.
No, that's great. I would love to talk about process. I think, you said covering the bases. I find that companies at that stage, even companies that are doing, I can think a few off the top of my head in our portfolio that are doing 30 to 50 million in revenue, that, they haven't really solidified processes for continually beating out fatigue in perpetuity on their evergreen campaigns. Like a lot of, if you're between, 7, 8, I would even say 7 to 9 figures, between that range, a lot of and maybe excluding, fashion brands that have new SKUs every 6 months, but a lot of companies that have 1 to 3 core product SKUs haven't set up funnels or evergreen creative campaigns with a process associated that is a flywheel of defining new experiments of, hey, here's how we can improve the combination of these metrics, whether it's engagement metrics on platform plus conversion metrics, ROAS, whatever it is, defining those experiments, getting new creative produced that align with those experiments, and then telling a story with the data that they're seeing from on platform or softwares like Triple Whale or Motion or what have you, and then going back around the flywheel. It's just sort of like, a lot of times I see brands make it to a certain point, things are working on platform, they're seeing, conversions and their MER is going up, but then there's like, they just stop They just run the same stuff for like months, and then they wonder why things are tanking and fatigue is setting in, and they then have to kind of double back. And that's that Groundhog's Day effect that I was talking about earlier. So I'd love to talk to you about your process and how you think about sustainable processes for creative, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. I think part of it is almost like when you're managing Facebook, you're like it's I always equate it to stock trading, which I've never done, but you're fighting against your lizard brain like the entire time because you're getting so much short-term signal. And I think something that's helpful is to just put processes in place to force yourself not to succumb to your worst instincts. So you don't want to be turning ads on and off in the account every day. You don't want to be toggling budgets up and down every day. So almost putting yourself on a schedule where it's like we're going to test this many assets every week. We're going to put at least one new asset into well everyone kind of scales differently, but if not into your like hyperscale winners campaign, into your moderate scale campaign, like get at least one new asset into play every week in a meaningful way. Because what I've seen is that sometimes, especially if you have a longer purchase consideration window or a higher price point item, putting a new asset into an ad set will bring a new audience into that ad set, and they may convert on your winner. So it will look like the new asset isn't getting conversions or isn't performing, but it's getting delivery, and it's like kind of bringing fresh blood into the ad set and improving your overall metrics. So I think weighing ad set metrics a little bit more heavily than like individual ad metrics. And I mean, the process is just forcing yourself to kind of refresh things on a cadence like that, but not overly tweak them, and then having the creative flywheel in place to fuel that with new creative. There's also an element of like sometimes you just have to take big swings, so like doing research and testing something and developing something that's like a complete departure from what you've been doing in the past, at least every 2 to 4 weeks, like speaking to a
Yep.
completely different audience, or shooting things in a completely different way.
Yeah, one thing that we've done is there's like so it's awesome that you just said creative flywheel. This is a term that we've been using internally every day, just building. That's what we're calling this process. So that's cool. But, I look at these two processes in parallel. You've got this flywheel, this creative flywheel that's like a circular motion that's creating that cadence and it's building momentum. And then you've got this linear process that is, I look at it mentally as like stages. So, you could take a big swing or a micro swing, but it's you're kind of in that stage one discovering something. You're just sort of throwing a wide net out there to see what works, what's going to land, and then you start to incrementally optimize and you bring that idea through a series of stages that ultimately hopefully gets that idea, that concept, whatever it is. It could be a full-fledged campaign or just a creative style to become fully integrated into your program. And then and that's part of the flywheel as well. And then to your point, every so often you're going back to that stage one to try to really rejuvenate your program overall. So that's really cool. It's good to know sometimes when you're working with clients and you're tinkering with these processes and these systems, sometimes you can feel like you're just so insulated. You're like, is this the best way to do this? So it's cool to just kind of hear that confirmation. And it seems like we approach things the same way, which is really cool.